A lot of the people who work with me have been with me for 13, 14 years. That's a long time for an entertainer to hold on to the same circle, Whitney once said, her voice calm but edged with something heavier. Your self-confidence, it gets dragged through the mud. She paused, almost like she was choosing each word from a file in her mind. That's why you need a foundation, an anchor. Quote, according to people who were closest to her, before Whitney Houston died, she allegedly shared something the industry never wanted the public to hear. She was believed to have kept a mental list, a private archive of stories about some of the biggest R&B divas alive, women whose love lives, it was said, were far more chaotic than any tabloid headline ever printed. These weren't harmless flings. These were secret liaisons with pastors, politicians, married producers, street hustlers, backup dancers, NBA players, security guards, men from nearly every corner of Black America. And Whitney, moving quietly through the same world, saw more than most. She was believed to know who slept with whom on tour, who allegedly traded intimacy for influence, who slid into addiction after meeting the wrong man, and who, behind hotel doors with no cameras and no witnesses, helped end a career with one bad night. For decades, these stories supposedly lived only in whispers backstage after curtain call, in dressing rooms after midnight over half-finished glasses of wine, or during emotional breakdowns fans never saw. Tonight, we walk into that vault. Not fairy tales, not sanitized biographies. Just the raw, tangled stories people around Whitney claim she carried with her. 15 R&B divas who, according to those whispers, loved recklessly and paid a price the public never fully understood. 1. Aretha Franklin, the secret pastors of Detroit. To understand the hidden chapter of Aretha Franklin's life, you have to picture Detroit in the mid-1970s, a city split right down the middle. On one side, church purity and Sunday morning respectability. On the other, the smoke-thick clubs and raw soul music that shook the same streets. And right in the center of that contradiction stood Aretha, the Queen of Soul, daughter of a legendary preacher, raised on Bible verses, but, as people quietly suggested, chased by demons no hymn could silence. Most people assumed Aretha's private romances happened in distant hotels, backstage corners, or during endless tours. But insiders claimed that was never the real story. The darker, more unsettling details were said to unfold in silence behind the heavy curtains of her own home on LaSalle Boulevard. Between 1974 and 1978, neighbors allegedly noticed cars with clergy plates pulling up after midnight. These weren't youth ministers or junior deacons. According to whispered accounts, they were full pastors respected, married pastors slipping into Aretha's house while the rest of Detroit slept. 3 names were circulated the most. Reverend James Holbrook, a married father of 2. Reverend Milton Gray, known for fiery sermons that rattled pews. And Reverend Darrell Hennon, the youngest and boldest of the trio. People who moved in those church circles claimed they didn't come for spiritual counseling. They came because Aretha was powerful, isolated, magnetic, and because, for them, the Queen of Soul supposedly offered something their pulpits never could: escape. The shock, for those who heard the stories, wasn't just that these men were preachers. It was that, according to reports, they walked straight through her front door. No motel aliases. No elaborate cover, no attempt to hide from God, their congregations, or their wives. Whitney knew the outlines of this world because her own mother sang with gospel choirs that traveled the same circuit. In those choirs, people said, the conversations after service got very real. In dressing rooms, while robes were being unzipped and makeup wiped away, women spoke in low voices about what really happened after the benediction. Whitney, still young, listened and learned. She heard enough to suspect that the rumors weren't invented out of thin air. She absorbed the contrast. The woman the world saw as the voice of Sunday morning, allegedly living with Friday night temptations, no one dared to print. That tension, the queen who could save souls but, according to whispers, struggled to save her own, became one of the most carefully protected shadows in the history of black music. 2. Diana Ross, the politicians and the Hollywood tycoon. People like to believe Diana Ross climbed the mountain of fame on talent alone. A pure success story written in glitter and microphone feedback. But inside Motown's closed offices, according to longtime insiders, a different version of the story was murmured, one that never appeared in contracts or press releases. Between 1972 and 1979, Diana wasn't just a superstar. She was described as a weather system ambition, beauty, and calculation swirling in one body. And in Hollywood, storms like that drew in powerful men. While fans fantasized about her entanglements with dancers or producers, those closest to the machinery of the industry claimed the real connections were far more explosive. Whispers said her most influential lovers weren't performers at all. They were men who shaped the country. Two California politicians, both married, both rising stars, were rumored to have spent late nights with her after fundraisers and award shows. One of them, insiders quietly alleged, met Diana repeatedly in a private suite at the Beverly Hills Hotel, the same suite some claimed she slipped into during the 1977 Emmy Awards afterparty. The third man, the stories went, was an untouchable figure, a media CEO whose decisions could rearrange television schedules, award show appearances, and magazine covers with a single phone call. For Diana, whose career depended on staying visible nationwide, his attention wasn't just flattering, it was said to be strategic. According to people who worked behind the scenes, he arranged exclusive interviews, network specials, carefully timed magazine covers, all right after quiet nights spent behind locked doors. This wasn't painted as simple romance. It was described as power trading disguised as intimacy. Whitney allegedly first heard it laid out during rehearsals for Motown 25. An older show director, half drunk and bitter about being pushed aside, reportedly told a room full of singers, "Diana never needed Motown. She had senators, she had Hollywood, she had the whole damn West Coast in her pocket." The room, people said, went silent. No one laughed. No one called it a lie. Whitney, still rising, watched that silence and understood. In an industry built on image, the things no one dared to challenge out loud often held more truth than the official stories. The message that stayed with her was clear. Diana Ross wasn't just rumored to be sleeping with powerful men. According to those old whispers, she was entangled with men who could shape the industry itself. 3. Chaka Khan, the songwriters. She paid with desire. Chaka Khan never tried to sell herself as a saint. She was, as musicians described her, fire wrapped in velvet, a voice that could melt a crowded room, and a hunger for life that often blazed brighter than the fame that followed her. But beneath the wild, carefree image fans adored, insiders spoke of a quieter, more transactional truth. According to bandmates and studio staff, Chaka sometimes paid for musical perfection, with the only currency certain men truly respected. Her body, between 1977 and 1982, Rufus was struggling. The band was loved. Yes, but love didn't guarantee hits. They needed records that exploded off the radio, songs that would lock them into the charts. In Chicago and Los Angeles studios, writers and session players supposedly began to murmur that Chaka was giving everything to get the songs she believed her voice deserved. And everything in some of those stories didn't mean money. The names repeated the most in those late-night conversations were Don Myrick, a saxophonist whose smoky solos helped define Chicago soul, and Louis Price, a former Temptations vocalist with a smooth baritone and a dangerous kind of charm. These men had real talent. And according to people in the room, they knew exactly what Chaka wanted. Rewrites, new bridges, key changes that wrapped around her range like silk. What they allegedly wanted in return wasn't publishing credit. It was her. Another songwriter whose name, people insisted, was deliberately buried was rumored to have spent 2 full nights with Chaka during a locked-door session in Los Angeles in 1979. They were said to have emerged with a completely reworked chorus that later turned into a minor hit. In those retellings, there was no cartoonish manipulation, no one-sided seduction. It was survival. Chaka wanted songs worthy of the soul roaring out of her, and an industry that rarely respected black women who demanded creative control often forced them onto battlefields no contract mentioned. Whitney crossed paths with Chaka during overlapping tours. Musicians talk, and background players talk even more. In hotel bars and cramped tour buses, they painted vivid pictures of Chaka strolling into writing rooms wearing silk robes, pouring whiskey into chipped glasses, and demanding, not pleading, that they fix her songs. To them, the mix of sensuality and authority was shocking. To Chaka, according to those stories, it was business. Whitney, watching from a small distance, learned a brutal lesson early. In R&B, sometimes a woman had to fight for her sound on a stage, in a studio, and allegedly in a bedroom. 4. Patti LaBelle. The men who fed her and dressed her. Patti LaBelle's chapter doesn't explode with scandal the way some of the others do. It settles in slowly, like a quiet ache. While other women in Whitney's mental file were tied to power, status, or danger, Patti's secrets, according to people who traveled with her, grew out of something else entirely: loneliness. A loneliness born from back-to-back tours, recycled hotel rooms that smelled like old carpet and stale air freshener, and nights when applause faded faster than the sound of a closing door. Her lovers, insiders claimed, weren't moguls or hit-making producers. They weren't even fellow stars. They were the men in the background, the ones who ironed her clothes, plated her food, and made sure the show looked perfect before the lights went up. The invisible ones. From 1986 to 1988, Patti was said to have traveled with a private tour chef named Jerome Fields, a quiet man from New Orleans who cooked gumbo exactly the way she liked it: thick, spicy, rich, with memories of home. Crew members later told stories of Jerome pushing a tray of food down a hallway long after midnight, knocking gently on Patti's sweet door. He wasn't just dropping off dessert. According to those who noticed the pattern, he stayed inside far longer than any meal required. Then came Omar Lewis, her stylist. On stage, Omar was flamboyant, dramatic, stitching sequins and feathers into Patti's armor. Offstage, people described him as unusually gentle with her. He traveled side by side with Patti through Europe in 1989, making sure every camera-ready moment was flawless. Rumors began spreading after hotel cleaners reportedly found men's clothing in Patti's room that didn't match her husband's or any band members. Shirts too small, cologne too unfamiliar. Patti never built a persona around seduction. She didn't seem to chase power through romance. The way crew members told it, she simply got attached to the people who stayed closest to the hands that zipped her costumes, the man who made sure she ate, the person who adjusted her hem backstage when everyone else only cared about the high notes. The quiet intimacy of proximity. Whitney first heard the shape of this story one late night behind the scenes of Soul Train in 1990. Patti, exhausted and a little giddy after a long rehearsal, was said to have leaned back in her chair and told Whitney, "Baby, when you're out here all year long, sometimes the ones who love you best are the ones making your food and fixing your clothes." Whitney never forgot that line. It cut through the glamour and left something raw and human in its place. Behind the feathers, the heels, and the powerhouse vocals, Patti LaBelle wasn't chasing influence. She was chasing warmth wherever it appeared, even if it arrived carrying a garment bag or a tray. 5. Mary J. Blige, the dangerous men of New York. What if the men Mary J. Blige loved were more dangerous than the demons she sang about? That was the chilling question murmured through New York studios and backstage corridors in the mid-1990 seconds, when Mary's voice was healing millions but her private choices, according to insiders, were leading her toward the city's criminal shadows. Her heartbreak, people said, wasn't just metaphor. It had a pulse, a street name, and sometimes a weapon. Between 1995 and 1997, those close to the scene claimed Mary drifted toward men who operated outside the law, men who supplied Brooklyn neighborhoods with unregistered guns, and who maintained control through fear more than respect. The most infamous name whispered in those circles was a man known as Tone Slick, a figure whose temper was said to be as volatile as the blocks he controlled. On July 18, 1996, at Queensbridge Houses, a rooftop mixtape party spiraled out of control. Witnesses later told a story. Mary, arriving quietly in a black Lexus at 11:52 p.m., stepping out beside Tone, her hood up despite the heavy summer heat. Minutes later, a verbal disagreement reportedly flipped into a full-on brawl when Tone slammed his fist into another man's jaw, sending bodies crashing toward the stairwell. Residents claimed Mary screamed for him to stop as sirens began to echo up from Vernon Boulevard. The NYPD raid that followed ended the party, but not the talk. Now, Mary hadn't just been seen near the edges of danger. She had been seen publicly beside one of Brooklyn's most unpredictable men. Sony Music's security team, according to staff, flagged the situation the very next morning, and the story traveled fast through executives, road managers, artists who knew exactly how quickly one violent association could stain a career. During a charity event in late 1997, it was said that Nas pulled Whitney aside and spoke in a low, careful voice. "Mars running with men who ain't built for love. They're built for survival." Those words stayed with Whitney. She understood what it meant to look for protection in all the wrong corners. Mary, according to insiders, wasn't just sleeping with many men. She was getting involved with men who carried guns, men who used violence instead of sentences, men whose loyalties could change overnight. Her love life wasn't merely messy, it was combustible. And in New York during the 90 seconds, combustible men didn't just leave broken hearts, they left casualties. 6. Toni Braxton, the men outside the music. People loved to imagine that Toni Braxton only dated men who matched her glamorous world. Producers, singers, A-list executives in designer suits. The quiet rumor floating around Beverly Hills studios in the late 90 seconds told a very different story. Toni, according to those who watched from behind mixing boards and office doors, was rarely drawn to Hollywood insiders at all. She was drawn to men whose lives existed far beyond the entertainment industry. Her first shocking romance was said to have sparked in February 1996 when she visited Dr. Kevin Lawrence, a plastic surgeon on Wilshire Boulevard, for what LaFace Records wrote off as a routine refinement consultation. The appointment took 30 minutes. The alleged affair lasted almost 8 months. Nurses later claimed Toni returned to his office on February 17th at 11:40 p.m., slipping in through the rear service entrance under a wide-brimmed hat. A week later, hotel staff at a Palm Springs villa reportedly saw Toni and Lawrence dining by the pool under a false reservation name, Miss Carter. The setting wasn't a recording studio or a label office. It was a world of private jets, quiet consultations, and scalpels. But Toni's pattern, insiders said, didn't stop with doctors. In May 1997, during a celebrity boxing charity event hosted by Eddie Murphy, she met Marcus Steele, a semi-pro wrestler whose jawline had taken real hits and whose body was sculpted more by impact than by Hollywood trainers. Within weeks, Marcus was spotted entering Toni's tour bus during the Secrets Tour, hidden behind wardrobe crates, as the bus rolled out of Phoenix on June 3rd at 12:22 a.m. Crew members claimed he stayed through the night and slipped off at an abandoned rest stop outside Tucson as the sun came up. In San Antonio, a security guard later admitted he had let Marcus in through a loading ramp minutes after Toni finished "Unbreak My Heart," her dress still shimmering with stage sweat. The line between fantasy and reality blurred in those moments. One minute she was singing about devastation to an arena, the next she was pulled into the arms of a man whose world had nothing to do with record deals. Whitney heard these stories directly from Babyface and L.A. Reid during a late-night listening session in 1998, according to people who were present. They weren't laughing, they were worried. Toni wasn't just avoiding the typical Hollywood dating pool, she was running from it into the arms of men who couldn't leverage her fame because they didn't belong to her industry at all. The cost, insiders claimed, was chaos. Missed rehearsals, delayed flights, a schedule that stopped making sense, and a heart torn between two universes, one under stage lights, one far away from them. Toni didn't sleep with a long list of men. She slept with men who stood completely outside her world. And that's what made her story, to Whitney, so startling. 7. Janet Jackson, The Years of Experiments. What does a superstar do when talent alone stops feeling like enough? When she wants to reinvent not just her sound, but her emotions, her image, the way she loves? For Janet Jackson, insiders later whispered, the answer was hidden in a secret 2-year period they spoke about with both awe and disbelief. Between 1990 and 1992, Janet was believed not to be dating for love, status, or companionship. She was dating for research. Her intimacy, according to people in her orbit, turned into a private laboratory. And the men she chose were as unexpected as the reasons she chose them. The first was Stephen Harville, a photographer she met during a Rolling Stone shoot on January 14, 1990. Crew members said Janet dismissed her team early that night, then invited Stephen to her Malibu home under the pretense of reviewing proofs. A security guard later recalled seeing Stephen leave at 3:07 a.m., barefoot, his boots in his hands like he'd left in a hurry. Months later, Janet attended a Joffrey Ballet performance in Chicago. There, she reportedly locked eyes with Daniel Armit, a principal dancer whose movements struck her as almost otherworldly. By February 1991, Daniel had been flown to Los Angeles and placed in a guest house near Janet's Echo Park property, officially for movement analysis. Neighbors claimed they saw Janet walk barefoot between the houses each evening, a glass of red wine in her hand, disappearing behind his door as twilight faded. But the most explosive chapter, according to those who whispered, unfolded in July 1992 after a documentary screening at the Directors Guild Theater on Sunset Boulevard. Janet was seen leaving in a black limousine with a young music video director whose name insiders still refuse to print. The driver, fired weeks later, allegedly told friends they didn't emerge from that car for over 4 hours. When they finally did, their eyeliner was smudged, clothes wrinkled, energy vibrating with a kind of electricity no rehearsal could explain. Each of these men, it was said, later signed lifetime non-disclosure agreements, legal documents that locked their memories behind airtight clauses. No interviews, no tell-all books, no late-night talk show confessions. Janet, according to a stylist who dressed both her and Whitney, wasn't being reckless. She was studying, testing the limits of desire, connection, and control as if they were instruments on a studio console. Janet didn't sleep with a long list of men just to feel wanted. She chose men who offered new emotional textures, different art forms, different ways of moving, thinking, reacting. Each encounter, people claimed, became a blueprint for a new creative era she was building. That's why, in Whitney's unseen file, Janet's chapter felt less like a scandal and more like one of the most calculated, misunderstood experiments in modern R&B history. 8. Brandy, the men old enough to know better. Nothing strips away innocence faster than the wrong man. And for Brandy, barely 18 and already branded as America's R&B good girl, the wrong men, according to people who watched up close, were almost always older. Much older. From 1997 to 2000, industry insiders said they saw a pattern forming in real time. Brandy drifting toward men 10, 12, sometimes nearly 15 years older than she was. Men who should have known the line between mentorship and seduction, and as some claimed, chose to smear it instead. Her first serious entanglement was said to have begun after the Never Say Never Listening event in October 1997, where she met DJ Ronnie Vega, a 2-year-old club fixture with a gravelly voice and a reputation for dating up-and-coming singers. Witnesses at the rooftop after-party recalled Brandy sitting curled beside him on a couch, listening as he spoke to her in soothing, mentor-like tones, except the way his hand rested on her thigh told an entirely different story. By March 1998, Vega's burgundy Lexus was reportedly seen idling behind Record One Studios around 9 p.m. on a regular basis. Producers started joking that Brandy had the oldest boyfriend in R&B. But behind closed doors, no one was really laughing. The joke hid a disturbing truth. She was still a girl in a grown man's orbit. Things allegedly escalated in April 1999. A Chicago producer known more for his charm than his chart positions was said to have booked Brandy into a fake writing session from 7 to 10 p.m. at a North Hollywood studio. According to a staff member, no music was ever recorded. Instead, he dimmed the lights, ordered takeout, and spent 3 hours talking to Brandy about emotional access, touching her hands, telling her she was special in ways boys her age could never understand. He was nearly 15 years older. The real weight of it surfaced during the filming of Double Platinum in November 1999. Between takes, Brandy reportedly sat down beside Whitney and whispered, "I don't want boys my age. They don't make me feel safe." Whitney didn't lecture her. She recognized the wound immediately, a young star looking for safety in men who had too much power and too little restraint. Brandy wasn't believed to be sleeping with dozens of partners. She was getting involved with men who knew exactly how inexperienced she was. Men who saw vulnerability and mistook it for permission. Men who shaped her understanding of love long before she had the chance to define it herself. That, in Whitney's private file, made Brandy's chapter one of the quietest and one of the most troubling. 9. Faith Evans, the Atlanta flights nobody was supposed to know about. What if the real love triangle in Faith Evans's life wasn't about Biggie or Tupac at all, but about a man the public still doesn't know, someone she was rumored to fly across the country to see? That was the question that, according to former Bad Boy insiders, haunted the hallways in the late 90 seconds. Engineers, managers, backup vocalists, they all started noticing the same pattern. Faith disappearing between sessions like she had a second life in another city. From 1,000, 998 to 1,999, insiders claimed Faith began booking last-minute flights to Atlanta, each under a different alias: Marie Fisher, Tanya Ellison, G. Wallace. She rarely stayed more than one night. The reason, people whispered, was a producer known only in underground circles as Major King. He wasn't famous, he wasn't charting, he wasn't signed to a big label. But he had something Faith supposedly craved: a distinct sound and a kind of street gentleman charm that wrapped around her like silk. On September 12, 1998, staff at the Renaissance Atlanta Midtown later recalled seeing Faith arrive at 10:14 p.m., baseball cap pulled low, moving like she didn't want anyone to recognize her. At 10:27 p.m., Major King reportedly walked through the lobby. Security footage was said to have shown them entering the elevator separately and exiting together on the 14th floor. By morning, Faith was back on a plane to Newark as if nothing had happened. But secrets like that rarely stay buried. An assistant engineer at Bad Boy, the kind of person everyone forgets is in the room until he repeats what he heard later, told Kelly Price that Faith had recorded a demo in early 1999, softly mirroring a man's voice saying, "You don't belong to them tonight, Gaunt." Kelly, shocked, supposedly carried that story straight to Whitney during rehearsals for VH1 Divas. That wasn't all. Flight logs reportedly showed Faith flying to Atlanta 6 times between February and November 1999, always alone, always under an alias, never for more than 24 hours. Every time she came back, people in the studio noticed the same details: the softened eyes, the smudged eyeliner, the slight tremor in her hands, like she was holding on to something fragile and forbidden. Faith wasn't sleeping with a crowd. She was seeing one man too frequently, too far away, too quietly. To Whitney, the scandal wasn't just the affair. It was the precision with which Faith, according to those around her, managed to keep it from the world. 10. Keyshia Cole. The Broken Men and the Nights That Followed. Some women fall for charm. According to those who knew her, Keyshia Cole fell for wounds. Not the kind you see in photographs, the kind that walk, talk, and look you in the eye while quietly dragging you into their darkness. If Faith Evans allegedly hid her love on planes to Atlanta, Keyshia was said to hide hers behind men who were already damaged, men with records, men with heavy histories, men whose pain seemed bigger than her own. Between 2004 and 2009, insiders claimed she cycled through relationships with men who carried criminal pasts, deep trauma, or both. One of the earliest whispers centered on July 2005 during the filming of her BET series The Way It Is. Crew members reportedly noticed a tall, heavily tattooed man waiting outside her Oakland house night after night in a silver Dodge Charger. His name, people said, was Darius D-Lock Freeman, recently released from San Quentin on a burglary plea just 10 months earlier. On July 22nd, a camera operator swore he saw Keyshia sneaking D-Lock through the back entrance around 1:30 a.m., despite producers begging her not to be seen publicly with him. The relationship, by most accounts, burned hot and fast 3 chaotic months of arguments, reconciliations, and late-night visits. Then came Trevor Miles, a former security guard with a reputation for a short fuse. During the Let It Go tour in September 2007, hotel staff in Charlotte claimed they heard shouting from Keyshia's suite at 3:18 a.m., followed by Trevor storming out shirtless, blood on his knuckles, eyes wild. Insiders said a lamp had been smashed during a jealous argument, and that Keyshia begged security not to file an incident report that would end up in the press. Even after the shouting stopped, Trevor reportedly kept resurfacing in rehearsals, backstage corridors, hotel parking lots like a storm that wouldn't clear. The most tangled situation was believed to have surfaced in 2010, when Keyshia began seeing a divorced father named Anthony Reed, a man described as charming, unemployed, and emotionally unstable. A stylist who worked with both Whitney and Keyshia later told Whitney during a bed event, "Keyshia loves project men. If he's broken, she'll try to fix him." It wasn't a punchline. It was a warning. Keyshia, according to those around her, didn't go through many men because she was careless. She did it because she kept trying to rescue men who had nothing left to give back. And every time one of them walked away, it carved out another hollow space inside her loneliness, a space Whitney recognized from her own life. 11. Ashanti. The dancers, the dressing rooms. The summer of 2003. Every R&B diva has a pattern. Ashanti's, people said, was simple and almost predictable. She fell for the men whose bodies told stories before she even opened her mouth to sing. While Mary's men allegedly carried guns and Toni's carried degrees or licenses, Ashanti's men carried choreography. They were the dancers, sweat-slicked, muscle-defined, orbiting her on stage every night during the Murder Incorporated era, like planets drawn to a sun. And according to crew members, the summer of 2003 became legend. It reportedly began in June during the Rock the Mic tour. Ashanti was seen slipping into a rehearsal room at Madison Square Garden with Troy Batiste, a dancer with impossible abs and a reputation for seducing women without saying much at all. The rehearsal ended at 9 p.m. Troy, according to a janitor, didn't walk out until 11:47 p.m. He claimed he heard laughter, then a long silence, then the metallic crash of a clothing rack hitting the floor. But Troy wasn't the only name that stuck. In July 2003, as the tour moved to Miami, Ashanti was said to have become close to Lamar J., a Jamaican dancer known for his gravity-defying moves and an even more acrobatic personal reputation. At the American Airlines Arena, a stagehand reported seeing Ashanti pull Lamar into her dressing room during a pre-show break. They emerged about 30 minutes later, Ashanti glowing, Lamar adjusting his belt and straightening his shirt. The third name, Vince McCall, was the one Whitney reportedly heard most often. During the 2003 BET Awards after-party, Vince was spotted following Ashanti down a restricted hallway. Witnesses said he placed his hands on her waist as she leaned in, whispering directly into his ear. Whatever she said, he didn't move away. A BET producer later summed it up for a choreographer who also worked with Whitney. Ashanti likes men who move, men who sweat, men who follow the rhythm she gives them. The choreographer, half amused and half impressed, repeated that line to Whitney. He added, "That girl doesn't touch a man who isn't in sync. If he can't dance with her on stage, he sure isn't dancing with her off it." Ashanti wasn't portrayed as reckless in Whitney's mental archive, just consistent. Her weakness, if you could call it that, was men whose bodies already knew how to follow her lead. 12. Kelly Rowland, the International Lovers. If Ashanti's lovers danced around her, Kelly Rowland seemed to circle the globe. She wasn't drawn to street legends or industry power brokers, according to the people who traveled with her. She was drawn to men whose accents bent her name in new directions, men from places she'd only seen on postcards before Destiny's Child. Between 2001 and 2004, as Destiny's Child toured the world, Kelly quietly built a reputation among crew members for leaving each continent with one more secret connection than she'd arrived with. Not flings with random fans, but encounters with foreign men whose worlds felt completely different from Houston, Texas. The first whisper, insiders said, began in February 2001 in Milan during the Survivor promotional run. At a fashion afterparty hosted by Dolce & Gabbana, Kelly met an Italian entrepreneur named Riccardo Marino. Witnesses claimed he kissed her hand within 5 minutes of meeting her, old world style. Within 2 hours, Kelly slipped out of the party through a side exit. Staff said Riccardo followed shortly after. At the hotel, employees later recalled that Riccardo didn't check out until 11 a.m. the next morning. 3 months later in Berlin, the pattern seemed to repeat. Kelly was reportedly seen dining privately with Jonas Klein, a German model whose cheekbones were sharp enough to belong on billboards. A paparazzo captured Kelly entering the Ritz-Carlton at 12:03 a.m. Jonas appeared on camera 44 seconds later, ducking in through a staff elevator entrance instead of the front door. Then came Brazil, the chapter people in the touring world whispered about the loudest. In October 2003, during a Rio de Janeiro stop on the Dangerously in Love tour, Kelly was rumored to have fallen into a whirlwind fling with Marco Valente, a semi-pro footballer with sunburned shoulders and a beach-struck smile. On October 18th, after a Copacabana beachfront party, witnesses said Kelly and Marco sprinted into the ocean fully dressed, laughing like kids who'd escaped curfew. They didn't come back to shore for nearly 20 minutes. Whitney heard about Kelly's pattern from a European stylist who had toured with both Destiny's Child and Whitney's own dancers. The stylist told her, half admiring, half worried, "Kelly doesn't pick men. She picks countries. Each one gives her a different version of herself." Kelly, according to those who watched her grow up on the road, wasn't sleeping with random men to feel powerful. She chose men who represented worlds she never had access to as a child, men whose language, culture, and touch made her feel like she was briefly living another life. Her lovers weren't trophies. In Whitney's unseen file, they were postcards. 13. Fantasia, the married men in the Carolinas. Fantasia Barrino's story didn't revolve around crime bosses or slick industry executives. Her danger, according to people in North and South Carolina church networks, came in a more familiar, more painful form. Married men, especially married men from her own community, men whose faces she could have seen in church pews growing up. Between 2006 and 2009, Fantasia was believed to have fallen into a repeating pattern that scorched her emotionally. She kept choosing men who already had wives, children, and entire lives that didn't have room for her. The first situation, people in Charlotte whispered, appeared in August 2006 when Fantasia allegedly began spending late nights with David Hartman, a married youth pastor who lived just 2 blocks from her aunt. Neighbors claimed they saw Fantasia's Cadillac Escalade parked outside his house well past midnight on multiple occasions. On August 29th, a woman walking her dog at 2 a.m. reportedly saw Fantasia step out of the house wearing a hoodie and sunglasses at an hour when no one needed protection from the sun. Then, in March 2008, Fantasia was said to have started seeing Shane Calloway, a married HVAC technician from Columbia, South Carolina. They met, according to a lighting tech, after one of her shows when Shane repaired an overheated AC unit backstage. The tech later insisted that Fantasia invited him to her Greensboro home on March 17th, and that he stayed until sunrise. But the relationship that nearly ripped her life apart and weighed heavily on Whitney's mind was Antoine Cook, the married cell phone salesman whose affair with Fantasia became public in 2009. Court documents eventually revealed that Antoine's wife had discovered hotel receipts from August 16th at the Ritz-Carlton in Charlotte, where Fantasia and Antoine allegedly spent the night under the alias T. Jackson. The scandal almost destroyed Fantasia, culminating in a very public emotional breakdown in late 2010. Whitney heard about all 3 situations through church circles, promoters, and, according to one account, a North Carolina pastor who begged her to talk to Fantasia before things got worse. Whitney understood that kind of hurt. She knew what it meant to love men who could never fully belong to you, no matter how fiercely they held you in private. In Whitney's internal ledger, Fantasia's story wasn't about moral judgment. It was about a woman reaching for love in places that were already occupied. 14. Beyoncé, the pre-fame boys they buried. Beyoncé's chapter doesn't start with global tours or diamond-certified albums. It begins in Houston neighborhood streets, strip mall studios, and local dance academies long before Destiny's Child became a brand. People like to tell themselves Beyoncé never had a messy romantic past, that she sprang fully formed and polished. But according to producers and dancers who knew her early, the truth was edited long before the world saw her. Between 1996 and 1998, Beyoncé then, just a teenage rising star, quietly dated several boys in Houston's private dance and music circles. Relationships that, according to insiders, were carefully erased by the time she became Beyoncé. The first name people whispered was Laren Simmons, a dancer at the Hip Hop Dance Academy. On April 11, 1996, after rehearsal, Beyoncé was reportedly seen kissing Laron behind the studio dumpster, thinking they were alone except for a 4-year-old classmate who later repeated the story. Months later, in January 1997, Beyoncé was said to have started seeing a local rapper known as Lil Dre, whose mixtapes floated up and down Cullen Boulevard. They were allegedly spotted holding hands at a Whataburger drive-thru at 1 a.m., the kind of small-town date no one thought would matter. Her father and manager, Matthew Knowles, according to people around them, shut that situation down within days. But the relationship insiders talked about most involved a high school basketball player named Marcus Hill, who attended Yates High School. Beyoncé was reportedly seen with him 3 times between April and July 1998, including one late-night encounter where she climbed into his car outside a Blockbuster video at 11:52 p.m. A friend of Marcus later claimed they were in the back seat for over an hour, believing no one recognized them. Whitney heard these stories through Texas, producers who worked Beyoncé's early showcases. They said her team moved quickly and decisively. Any boy she had touched before fame was, from a PR standpoint, erased. No fotos, no names, no interviews. Beyoncé's file in Whitney's mental archive was small but telling. It wasn't about scandalous affairs or dangerous men. It was about how thoroughly a young girl's normal, messy teenage experiences could be buried once the world decided she had to look perfect. 15. Aaliyah, the men behind the camera. Aaliyah's story was the one Whitney carried the heaviest, according to those who knew her, not because it was the wildest, but because it was the quietest. Aaliyah's rumored lovers weren't larger-than-life street figures or famous musicians. They were the men behind the scenes, behind cameras, cables, call sheets, the ones whose names rarely made it to posters. Between 1999 and 2001, while filming Romeo Must Die and Queen of the Damned, Aaliyah was believed to have become entangled with at least 4 crew members, men older than her, more experienced, and, as people on set described it, disarmed by her softness and innocence. The first was said to be Ryan Kent, a stunt coordinator on Romeo Must Die. On October 3, 1999, crew members claimed Aaliyah spent nearly 2 hours in Ryan's trailer during lunch break. When she finally emerged, her hair looked slightly tousled, and she wore a shy, almost private smile. Then came Marco Tilden, a lighting technician. On January 12, 2000, Marco was reportedly seen adjusting the straps of Aaliyah's costume for much longer than necessary. A wardrobe assistant swore she saw Aaliyah slip a small piece of paper, presumably a phone number, into Marco's back pocket as she walked away. During Queen of the Damned, things seemed to intensify. A second unit director, never named publicly, was rumored to have spent an entire night with Aaliyah in his Melbourne hotel room on June 21, 2001, after a wrap party at Crown Casino. A hotel attendant later claimed Aaliyah left at 5:43 a.m., still wearing the same sequined skirt from the party hours earlier. The last man frequently mentioned was a dancer from her Try Again video, identified by some as Chris Daly. Their chemistry on set, according to other dancers, was obvious to everyone except the public. One backup dancer told Whitney, "Aaliyah didn't pick stars. She picked the men who made her feel normal." In the end, people close to Whitney insisted she didn't hold on to these stories to shame anyone. She carried them because she understood them. These 15 women weren't cartoon stereotypes of reckless divas. They were human black women trying to survive in an industry that demanded perfection while offering isolation, temptation, and secrets that no spotlight could erase. Whitney carried their truths, it was said, because she fought the same invisible wars, knew the same kind of men who could lift you up one night and break you the next, and felt the same hunger to be loved beyond the stage lights. Now it comes back to you. Which story stayed with you the longest? Which Divas chapter should be opened wider, examined deeper, in the next video? Share it in the comments below. Every response becomes part of the record they never wanted written. And if you want more hidden files, more untold history, more uncomfortable truths the industry never planned for you to see, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications.